is here, and wait, why don't we get Andrew to sit up the front? Yeah. Andrew lives out my way, and he had to drive through the floodwaters to get here this morning, which is kind of ironic given the topic that we're talking about. I think the motion on the screen is to note the roles and responsibilities of council to remove current consenting requirements for water tanks, explore other options like making them mandatory, and the planning committee will notify any plan changes. I'm happy to move. I was hoping Chris. I was hoping Chris would be here as chair, but I'll accept Councillor Walker as the seconder for that. Hang on, no, he is here. So I'm asking. Yeah, I think I want to acknowledge Chris Darby's role in promoting the water tank concept. So if you're happy to second this one, Chris, and Megan, if I get you to introduce it, and then I will run comments and questions together. We have got 23 papers that we're dealing with today, so if we can develop a bit of momentum, that would be really, really great. It would be our last favour to our Chief Executive. Despite the fact he'll deeply miss these meetings, I'm sure he'd like to get away a little bit early today. Okay, Megan, floor is yours.
No, hang on. He's leaving early anyway.
Order, councillors, I'm responsible for that uproar, but if we can focus back on the business before us, and I'll ask Megan Tyler to speak to the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, this is a very brief report, and I'm hearing your message, and I don't propose to say anything at all. I think you have introduced it. The key matters are the recommendations, the work that we're doing, and that we will come back to you on. So Andrew and I are very happy to take questions. Thank you.
That was brief. And I have nobody waiting to ask a question, so I should never have said that. Councillor Walker, followed by Councillor Cooper, and Councillor Darby, I suspect too.
I'm just looking at point 18, where it mentions in relation to serviced areas, in particular suburban Auckland, the built environment is quite different and generally not conducive to sites having 30,000 litre tanks. I don't know whether this is talking about existing buildings or new buildings, but I would suggest that that is not correct, that it is relatively easy often to design a substantial water tank into a structure. Sometimes that can actually reduce your insurance premium. Just as an aside, it can be underground. In Hobsonville, for example, tanks are underground on sites. They can be located under driveways. These tanks are modular, they're quite economical. So I have a concern that I think we still have an inherent bias against water tanks, and it should be the opposite. There are so many positives around them. I'd suggest relatively they're coming down in cost. But in general, I'm comfortable with this update, and I am pleased that it's coming from council as compared to Watercare, because I think that there certainly has been an inherent bias in Watercare for some time against water tanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I take that as a comment? Because I invited both comments and questions.
Take it as both.
Yeah. If there's anything you want to comment on that, Megan, feel free.
Thank you through the chair. Look, Councillor Walker, the purpose of that statement was effectively just to say there are smaller tanks that can be a little more useful, particularly in areas that are already built up. You're absolutely right. Some sites will be able to take big tanks, some won't. It was just a sense of scale, that's all. No judgment intended on that.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Just a comment in terms of the financial implications for the consenting, just to note we are going to absorb the free consents. There's no free consents. But I do hope, it does say it's only going to be in tens of thousands of dollars, but I do hope a lot of people do take it up. But thank you for your work on that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chris Darby.
Oh, thanks. Just a couple of questions and a bit of comment. Just in terms of something I discussed with you via email, Andrew, I pointed out a resource consent where the stormwater attenuation, that is the detention was discouraged by a planner because it was in stormwater management area 5, but the applicant was intending to use the water to supply a really big pool. So it was, there was both retention and detention, and the response from the planner was to recommend not using it because it was an SMA 5. So I'm just wondering if we need to get our heads around not just the work that you're about to do, but in the future, looking at those stormwater management areas again to ensure that retention and detention is encouraged. And I think you know why SMA 5s, there's not a big focus on the retentions there. But do you want to just explain that territory? It's quite complex.
So the main purpose for retention detention is to minimise the effects on streams. So we want to slow down the stormwater and reduce the volume of stormwater. So ideally, the retention is what we like to see, where people are reusing that water on their garden in particular. And we would absolutely like to encourage it, and not just based on the stormwater management areas. The stormwater management areas at the time of the unitary plan were focused on catchments that drained to streams that had erosion problems. And so we sort of structured the rules like that, but I think it could have been a lot simpler and just be more broadly encouraged, because even if you're discharging to the coast, for example, there's still a benefit for retaining that water. So yeah, I do take your point, and I think maybe maybe made the rules a little bit overly complex for a simple and positive thing for people to do.
So is that an area that we need to go back and look at? I think next week on Wednesday we're going to discuss a whole lot of things about the climate resilient water strategy, so that's good. Is that where we canvass lots of other ideas? I know this is a much narrower decision we're making here today.
Look, I'm happy to take that and ask the team, with Andrew to have a look at that, if that helps. Thanks.
And the other thing I would add is the need for guidance notes for planners. So there might be one in that area, but just to ensure that we don't get those perverse outcomes that I uncovered in just one application. So just look into this. Thanks to Andrew and his team for actually taking the initiative and not waiting on this. This came out of the Our Water discussion work that we're familiar with from last year, which has not landed. And rather than waiting for it to land and be absolutely finalised and polished, Andrew's team took the initiative to develop the business case for water tanks, and commend you for that. And from that, which I discovered a couple of months ago, and from that we're managing to bring this work forward. If that initiative had not been taken and not allowed to be taken, Megan, thank you, you don't get to where we are today. And I think initiative is going to have to be something that we really sponsor in this organisation. In the areas of management where people are skilled, they're fired up, they want to create solutions, we need to pave a way for them to come forward through management layers, get management support on innovation. I think it's one of the things that I think the council really needs to take a big leap on. But good moves today. Thanks, Stu.
Thank you. Look, can I just jump in with a question? I've talked to Andrew about that, and it arose out of a meeting that Tracy Mulholland and I had. And Tracy's in an area where you've got water retention tanks, but there was a sense that with water retention tanks, you can't use that, you can't store the water and use it in your garden. So can you clarify what the rules are around that? That's question number one. Question number two is, how we get to the point where we actually, obviously, we do away with the cost of the consent, that's a great move in the right, the consent sometimes costs more than the tank. So great to do that. Secondly, if you're paying to install a tank, that can be quite expensive as well. Some of us have installed our own tanks without doing anything terrible. So how can we facilitate people taking up the offer? Thirdly, just to check that these tanks are available, because if people know that the water restrictions are lasting through spring and summer and they love their garden, that's a real incentive to install a tank. And the fourth thing is just to note, is the one comment, if 1% of Aucklanders used water storage tanks to meet their non-potable needs, outside needs plus toilet system plus laundry, that would save 1 million litres a day. 1%, 1 in 100. And so, it's small, but as you built that up, clearly that would make a significant, meaningful difference. So thank you for the work on that, and maybe if you'd just like to address those questions, Andrew.
So I'll start the first one, using the stormwater retention detention tank. So yes, you can absolutely use the water in your retention detention tank. Normally they're designed to drain by themselves. So they fill up and they've got a small orifice, we call it, so it drains down slowly. So you can put a valve on that, but the important thing is that we have to encourage those residents who want to use that water that they have to empty the tank before it rains, because then it won't be having the positive stormwater effect. So, but if, in my point of view, if someone's got the wherewithal to put in a valve and probably a pump to get that water, they're probably competent enough to manage the tank for rainfall as well. So it's not something I don't think it's something we can absolutely support.
Thank you.
Your second question was around, facilitation of this, I guess, the free consents, the opportunity, particularly in winter, as you say, to fill these tanks. Look, we'll do everything we can in terms of advice that we can give. I would probably caution about whether there's any further financial assistance we can give, but there are certainly banks and other players in there that can give loans or assist with some of those kind of sustainability methods and opportunities. So we'll do the best we can in terms of our advice, and we're obviously dealing with the direct financial costs of the consents.
In relation to the tank suppliers, so I do know that the tank suppliers like Promax, for example, are actively marketing to Aucklanders right now to encourage them to get additional tanks, and we have been speaking to them about potentially gearing up for increased demand. And if I just make a comment to the Watercare's previous paper, where potentially the people who ran out of water who have rainwater tanks for all their water needs, we are looking at providing information leaflets and encouraging those people to get another tank now. That's probably, I think, one of our biggest campaigns that we want to get over the line in July, is to encourage people who needed a fill last year to get more storage now. That's a very important message.
Yeah, that's great on that last point. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Daniel Newman.
So just confirming I've got a comment, because I'm a bit annoyed about some of the planning discussion, but I have a comment about a question about the rainwater tanks. So presumably the rainwater tanks, they are for activities beyond drinking, because there would be issues around drinking water standards?
So yes, we're encouraging the rainwater tanks for non-potable use. And there are building consent requirements that we can't relax because of the building code if you start to connect your tank to your internal plumbing, and if you want to use it for drinking water, particularly where you're on the reticulated supply. So the very easiest thing people can do is find the size of tank that they can install as a permitted activity under the current rules and plumb it in just to use in their garden. They don't need a building consent, and they probably won't need a resource consent now. But if you want a bigger tank and you want to use it for your toilet and your washing machine, you start to move up the compliance thresholds. And it is all to do to address those concerns around backflow and contaminating the municipal network.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think that some people around this table need to have some more advice about drinking water standards, about what those standards require, which Watercare meets, but which would not necessarily be achieved by relying on water from the rainwater tanks. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is my comment on this, and it reflects some of the feedback subsequent from the last item as well as this, I think if there is a concern regarding planning and the coordination of planning between Watercare and this council, it is beholden on us as the councillors and the officials advising this council to reflect upon our role too. Because ultimately, it is this council that sets a direction for how we grow the region. And I have sat through sermon after sermon after sermon about housing, housing, housing. Scientists will tell you that you need water for life, and we have had a very big focus on pushing a lot of housing in this region, housing which creates demand. Councillor Darby has talked at length about the amount of housing that we need for Auckland, and this all puts pressure on our utilities, on our water supply, on our wastewater treatment, on our stormwater networks as we move from permeable to non-permeable surfaces, and obviously on our transport network. So it is appropriate that we reflect upon the need to be rather precautionary about how we plan for growth in the Auckland region and how we will manage the effects of growth in the Auckland region. And I thought that there was actually a pretty good attempt through the preparation of the evidence on the Auckland Unitary Plan for some coordinated approaches in relation to these matters. But as somebody who worked for Rob Fisher and who wrote a lot of who was a ghost writer for a lot of the evidence that became the council evidence, I have to say I was frustrated on occasions at the way in which Watercare wasn't able to influence some of the cases that became the council's evidence in relation to residential development. So I say that because actually it's quite easy when the media is here to have a kick at the chair and the chief executive of Watercare, but it is also appropriate for us to reflect upon our role as the people who ultimately make the decisions and who plan for the Auckland region that Watercare and Auckland Transport and Healthy Waters then has to accommodate through the provision of the utility infrastructure. If we don't have the infrastructure in place, then we won't be able to accommodate the growth and meet the effects of that. So I congratulate you on the work that you're doing here, but I do think that there is more information that's needed in relation to drinking water standards and also our role in facilitating the development of the network that ultimately will have to be funded to accommodate the growth that we want.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you. And it's just a comment, Megan. The purpose of the report, and I understand it's specifically to do with water tanks, but it does say to clarify the roles and responsibilities with respect to water as the lead-in. And I just want to pick up on two things. One, the conversation we had with Waikato Tainui, and the role of mana whenua, not just Waikato Tainui or mana whenua in this space of water, and also what Councillor Darby was referring to in terms of initiative and empowering people, and let's get some good decisions or thoughts through. They're going to come from mana whenua, and we need to be engaging more and more in that space. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and my commendations too to the people involved in this. This is really, really good, really encouraging, and kind of reflects what some people around here, not least of which Councillor Walker, has been saying literally for years and years and years ad nauseum at these meetings. So it's quite nice sometimes when these things come to fruition and we have this kind of prompt response that Councillor Darby was responding to. It's nice to see, and we need a lot more of this in the future. I just would say, in terms of the recommendations, and people talked about, encouraging uptake and being able to to accommodate that uptake. I think it's very useful if more information is actually put out on a number of things. If we're talking about financial incentives, for instance, I'm assuming there's considerable inbuilt financial incentives in your water use. So I know for myself, I've got a tank and I'm hooked up to town supply as well. I'm self-sufficient, maybe 8 months of the year, 9 months of the year normally. So that presumably is a big saving. I haven't worked it out, but someone will have done that. Conversely, with Watercare, one of the standing kind of gripes with people solely on tanks for some time now is that they've been charged too much. So they have their set solely on rain tanks. They've got their set charge that Watercare gives them, and people are very insistent that doesn't reflect their actual usage. Unless they go and get a meter, they don't have a way of proving that. And similarly, people like myself caught in between. So it would be useful if we could have some substantiation of savings, because if someone's contemplating this, obviously if you're getting told you're saving X number of dollars a year, that's an incentive for you to go ahead and do that. Similarly with Watercare, they have been kind of a little less than willing to give out some of the information in terms of the water usage that goes to substantiating that $600 or $700 a year fixed cost, and that's still a bone of contention amongst many residents in our area, a lot of whom are totally reliant on tanks. And finally, Mr. Mayor, Andrew, and it goes to your point about the water standards, and I'm assuming that's kind of for new properties or properties that might be hooked up, because obviously there's people I know who drink straight out of their tanks, like Councillor Sayers, who seems to be relatively normal, and most maybe not. and there are other people, of course, who have got a filter system, which can be pretty basic and relatively inexpensive. I know that too. So again, I think there's a little bit of packaging of information required there to make some of these things clear to people, but certainly to encourage people, then that costing is really important, because I think it will be meaningful and could tip a number of people over the edge in terms of investing in this. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the relatively normal Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Really good to see this kind of policy change and change in direction. I want to concur with Councillor Darby in terms of not only this, new initiatives that we need to bring through the organisations and be willing to change. There will be many areas, I think, throughout the organisation. So general comment, not specific to this, but just to my colleagues and the management, senior management team, is I'm sure there's lots of things that our communities can come up with as ideas, initiatives that under COVID, they can still get projects across the line if we're willing to be flexible ourselves. Non-potable water, just when putting out the brochure, just a suggestion that you might want to take on board. Non-potable water, I don't think everyone knows what that means. It's maybe non-drinking water or some other term. It might just be a little bit technical for the average reader, just an idea. And just reflecting too on Councillor Newman's and Councillor Watson's terms about the input about these quality of standards. See, I'm just a little bit worried if we say we can put in a water tank and we can't drink from it because it's rainwater coming off the roof. So just being quite clear, and I agree with, maybe there needs to be more education, but, people thousands of households have tanks right now drinking the rainwater, which is pure, with or without a filter, just pumping it to the tap. So I think there needs to be a slight air of caution there, and we're saying, hey, look, you can't drink the fresh rainwater. We might get our messaging wrong. Potentially. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Those of us on tank water, I've been drinking water straight out with just a simple filter for 30 years. Hasn't done me any harm. The relatively normal.
Us.
So look, thank you very much for that. Just finally, when will the resource consent no longer be charged for as of 1st of July? So, yep, probably we can all put things on our Facebook sites and have some way of getting that out there. But I think there will be a real mood at this point to to actually pick up the opportunity to get a tank in. And that extra information, I think, is really important, even if we run some other stuff on social media, you know, as with Councillor Mulholland's question, because there'll be a whole lot of people out there that are not aware they can do that, and they need to know the obligation as well as the right. Sorry, you had
Sorry, just a
you haven't
comment to
spoken
that.
yet,
Thank
so-
you, Worship. I have already just sent those questions. Sorry, so I just sent them directly to you guys instead of raising it. But I will say a small flyer or something that we can share with our communities would be very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, I think that's good. So somewhere we get it out. Obviously, there's been some coverage, but this morning in the Herald, there was 1 column inch on tank water. So we certainly need to get that message across and create the incentive. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much, Megan, Andrew, and team. So, yeah, that's a big step forward. We've been waiting a long time for it, and probably we should have done it much earlier. But hey, we've done it now, and that's good. Item number 11.